fleeing your only shelter, without your shoes, into a barren, windswept wilderness where the temperature is 30 degrees below zero. I mean, what could possibly force you to do something like that? For more than 60 years, that single question has been right at the heart of one of history's most chilling and persistent cold cases.
So today, we're going to piece together the final days of 9 experienced hikers deep in the Ural Mountains. We're going to examine the baffling, and I mean baffling, evidence they left behind, and explore the new science that might, just might, finally explain their terrifying end. You know, before the mystery, there was the mission. And to really understand the tragedy, we first need to get to know the people at its center. This wasn't just some casual weekend camping trip. No, this was a serious undertaking by a group of incredibly capable people.
A group was made up mostly of students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. They were young, they were brilliant, and they were all bonded by this incredible love for the outdoors. But here's the crucial part. They were not novices, not by a long shot. They were all certified, experienced hikers, led by the very capable 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov.
And what's so haunting about this slide is the mood. This is the last photograph ever taken of the group, recovered from one of their cameras. You can see them, they're working together, digging into the snow to set up their tent. They seem calm, prepared, totally focused. There is absolutely no hint of the unimaginable horror that was literally just hours away.
Their goal was to trek 190 miles across the brutal northern Urals and climb Mount Torton. This was a Category 3 expedition, which was the highest difficulty rating you could get at the time. So pulling this off was a massive achievement, a real testament to their skill and their endurance. They knew the risks, and they were more than ready for the challenge.
So what started as a standard, albeit very difficult expedition, soon spiraled into serious alarm. The silence that followed was the very first sign that something had gone catastrophically, terribly wrong.
The plan was for the group to send a telegram by February 12th. When that day came and went, there wasn't a lot of concern at first. Delays in trips like these were pretty common. But as the days turned into a week, their families grew worried and started demanding action. By February 20th, a full-scale search was launched, and just 6 days later, on the slopes of a mountain ominously named Holat Siak, which translates to Dead Mountain, they found the first clue.
What the search parties stumbled upon was not the scene of a typical accident. It was something far, far stranger. A scene that baffled investigators from the moment they laid eyes on it and became the absolute epicenter of this entire mystery. This is what they found. The tent, half collapsed and totally abandoned. But inside, all of the group's belongings, their warm clothing, supplies, food, and get this, their shoes were all just left behind. So you have to ask yourself, why would 9 experienced survivalists flee their only shelter into the lethal cold without their boots?
It gets weirder. Investigators determined that the large gashes in the side of the tent were made with a knife from the inside. They hadn't unzipped the entrance. They had frantically carved their way out. Whatever happened, it didn't give them time to use the door. They were escaping from their own tent.
So the search party followed these footprints down the slope for nearly a mile, and they came to a large cedar tree. And there, they found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. A small fire had been started, but it obviously wasn't enough. And the branches on the cedar tree, they were broken way up high, suggesting someone had desperately tried to climb it, maybe to get a better view, or maybe to escape something on the ground.
The discovery of the first 2 hikers was tragic, sure, but it kind of fit a narrative of getting lost and freezing to death. But as the search went on, the findings became progressively more disturbing, revealing a level of violence that seemed utterly inexplicable.
The next 3 bodies were found scattered between that cedar tree and the tent. The group's leader, Igor Dyatlov, along with Zineda Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin. The way they were positioned, facing the camp, it looked like a desperate, final attempt to get back to the shelter they had fled. They never made it. The official cause of death was hypothermia. But there was one small, unsettling detail. Slobodin had a minor skull fracture.
So you see the pattern here? The first 5 victims, as this table shows, appeared to have died from the elements, but the last 4 hikers, well, they were found over 2 months later, buried under 12 feet of snow in a nearby ravine, and they told a completely different and much more violent story. Their deaths were not from the cold.
The medical examiner, a Dr. Boris Valzhezhdeny, was just stunned.
He concluded that no human could have possibly inflicted these wounds, and he compared the force to being hit by a car at high speed.
Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had suffered just catastrophic skull damage. Semyon Zolotaryov and Ludmila Dubinina had numerous ribs completely shattered. But here's the most baffling part. There were no significant external wounds, no cuts, no bruises, as if they'd been crushed by some immense invisible pressure. And in what is easily the most gruesome detail of this whole case, Ludmila Dubinina was found to be missing her tongue.
So what on earth happened on that mountain? Faced with this bizarre, contradictory evidence, a panicked flight, hypothermia, and these crushing internal injuries, investigators were completely stumped. And for more than 60 years, the case has remained a source of intense, and I mean intense, speculation.
The official Soviet investigation back in 1959 was closed incredibly quickly, and it concluded that the hikers died from a compelling natural force. Now that is an incredibly vague explanation that did absolutely nothing to solve the mystery. If anything, it just deepened it, fueling decades of theories ranging from secret military weapons tests and UFOs to even an attack by a Yeti.
Now, you might be thinking the most logical explanation has always been an avalanche, right? It's a natural force, it's compelling, it happens in the mountains, but for decades, investigators and researchers just dismissed it. So before we get to the modern explanation, let's unpack why the most obvious answer seemed so completely wrong for so long.
Well, there were 4 huge problems with the avalanche theory. First, the search team reported 0 signs of a recent avalanche. Second, the slope where they pitched their tent was less than 30 degrees, which is generally considered way too shallow for an avalanche to even start. Third, why the 9-hour delay between setting up camp and fleeing? And finally, those car crash injuries. They just aren't typical for avalanche victims who usually die of suffocation.
All these contradictions made the avalanche theory seem pretty much impossible. But what if a very specific, a very rare type of avalanche could explain every single one of these strange details? Well, in 2021, new scientific modeling proposed exactly that. Researchers proposed something called a delayed slab avalanche. Okay, so here's how it could have worked. 1. The hikers cut into the snowpack to shelter their tent from the wind, but in doing so, they unknowingly made the slope unstable. 2. Strong katabatic winds, which are like these dense, heavy currents of air rushing down the mountainside, piled up a thick, heavy slab of snow right above their tent. 3. It took between about 7 and 13 hours for this slab to become heavy enough to just fail. That explains the long delay. And 4, when it finally released, it wasn't a huge classic avalanche. It was a small, dense slab that landed right on the tent, crushing the sleeping hikers with immense force. And that explains the massive internal injuries with no external sides. This theory completely recasts their final moments. Suddenly, the hikers who could still move are cutting their way out to drag their severely injured friends from the tent. Their panicked flight wasn't from some monster. It was a heroic, desperate attempt to save each other from a crushing, invisible foe. The science provides this really powerful, plausible mechanism that seems to answer every question. A delayed slab avalanche could explain the timing, the location, the lack of evidence, and even those horrific injuries. But, in a case with so many strange details, some people will always wonder. The science is compelling for sure, but the mystery of Dyatlov Pass endures. So what do you think?